I'm going to tell you what happened the way it actually happened. Not the way Garnett, Wyoming decided to remember it afterward, once everything was settled and it was safe to have been on the right side all along. Not the version where people who crossed the street when they saw me coming suddenly remembered they had always believed in fairness. I'm going to tell you the version where I was alone for 27 days with a notice of auction on my kitchen table and 2 children who didn't fully understand what was happening but understood enough to be quiet in a way that 8-year-olds and 5-year-olds are not supposed to be quiet. My name is Hattie Boone. 34 years old. 2 children, Thomas, who is 8 and has his father's way of thinking through a problem before he speaks, and Lily, who is 5 and has decided that the world is fundamentally interesting and intends to investigate it thoroughly. My husband Daniel built this farm from nothing over 7 years, and he died of pneumonia in the winter of 1871, and when he died he left me 80 acres, a debt I didn't know existed, and the education of finding out what a town is made of when it thinks no one is paying attention. The debt was Daniel's. He had borrowed from Roycassin, not a bank, but a man who operated like one, with the addition of a particular patience that banks don't usually have, the patience of someone who is willing to wait for the most advantageous moment to collect. Daniel had borrowed to buy the second herd 2 years before he died. He was going to tell me. I know he was going to tell me because I knew Daniel, and Daniel didn't keep things, he just waited for the right moment, and the right moment didn't come before the pneumonia did. Roycassin waited 4 months after Daniel died before he came to my door. Long enough that I was alone and without reserves. Not long enough that I'd had time to get my footing. He had the legal documents and the expression of a man who deeply regrets being in the position he is in, which I have since learned is the expression men wear when they are doing exactly what they intended to do all along and want credit for the regret. In 30 days, the farm would be auctioned to satisfy the debt. I went to 3 people in Garnett who I thought might help. The lawyer told me the paperwork was in order. Pastor Gale said he would pray for guidance. Margaret Aldrich, who had been Daniel's family's friend for 20 years, told me she was so sorry and that perhaps the children and I could find a room in town. I went home and sat at the kitchen table with the auction notice and the lamp and the silence of a house where 2 children have gone to bed early because they can feel something is wrong. I did not know what I was going to do. I did not know Cole Warden was going to read the auction notice on the public board 3 days later and find something in it that I had not known to look for. Cole Warden. I need to tell you who he was before I tell you what he did, because what he did only makes sense when you understand who he was, and who he was is not who Garnett decided he was. Garnett had decided Cole Warden was a man to be cautious around. He was large, quiet, had come from somewhere else and did not explain himself. He had the stillness of a man who had seen things most people in Garnett had not seen and was not interested in pretending otherwise. He lived on the eastern edge of town in a house he had repaired himself. He did his business at the general store and the land office and nowhere else. He nodded to people in the street and kept moving. I had exchanged perhaps 40 words with Cole Warden in the 2 years he had lived in Garnett. He had helped Thomas retrieve a ball that had gone over his fence once, handing it back without comment. He had held the door of the general store for me on a morning when I had Lily on my hip and 3 packages in my other arm. Small things. The ordinary currency of people who live in the same small town. I had not thought much about him. He had apparently thought enough about the situation to spend 3 days in the county records office before he came to my door. He knocked on a Tuesday morning, 10 days after Roycassin's visit. I opened the door and found Cole Warden on my step with his hat in his hands and a folder of papers under his arm, and the expression of a man who has prepared what he wants to say and is not certain of his welcome. "Mrs. Boone," he said. "I've been looking at the auction documents. I think there's something wrong with them." I looked at him. "Come in," I said. He sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder. He had pulled the original loan documents, the deed records for the property, and the statutes governing debt collection in Wyoming territory. He laid them out in a specific order and walked me through them with the precision of a man who has done a great deal of thinking and wants to make sure it is communicated accurately. What he had found, the interest Roy Casson had applied to the original debt was calculated at a rate that exceeded the legal limit for private loans in Wyoming territory by nearly 40%. The debt, correctly calculated, was substantially smaller than what Casson had presented. Small enough that the auction of the entire farm was not legally required. A smaller parcel, or a portion of the herd, would have been sufficient. Cole set down the last document. He may not have done it deliberately, he said. Or he may have. Either way, the number on that notice is wrong. Can this be proven? I asked. I already showed it to a lawyer in Cheyenne, he said. By letter. He confirmed it. I sat with that for a moment. Why did you do this? I asked. Cole looked at the table. The particular stillness that Garnett had decided was unsettling was, up close and in my kitchen, something different. It was the stillness of a man who thinks before he speaks because he means what he says. Because it wasn't right, he said. And I could see it wasn't right, and I know how to read land documents, and it seemed like someone should. Without drama. Without expectation of credit. As if it were simply a fact, a wrong thing existed. He had the means to address it, therefore he had. I had not cried since Daniel died. I had been too busy, or too afraid that if I started I wouldn't be able to stop. I did not cry at the kitchen table that morning either, but it was closer than it had been in a long time. What happens now? I asked. I file a challenge to the auction on your behalf, he said. Casson will likely settle for the corrected amount rather than fight it in court, because fighting it means his records get examined. Can you do that? File the challenge? Yes, he said. If you want me to. I looked at him. 34 years old, 2 children, 20 days left on the notice, and a man I had exchanged 40 words with sitting at my kitchen table with 3 days of county records work and a letter from a lawyer in Cheyenne. Yes, I said. I want you to. He filed the challenge that afternoon. Roy Casson's lawyer responded within the week. There were letters, and then a meeting at the land office that I was not present for. Cole went, and the Cheyenne lawyer's documentation went, and Roy Casson apparently looked at both and decided that settlement was preferable to scrutiny. The corrected debt was $412. I did not have $412. I had told Cole this honestly. I had the farm and the herd and approximately $90 in savings and the winter coming. He told me not to worry about that part yet. I found out what he meant 3 weeks later, when Roy Casson's lawyer sent confirmation that the debt had been satisfied in full and the lien released. Cole had paid it. Not as a loan. I want to be clear about this, because people in Garnett decided they knew what that meant and they were wrong. He paid it the way you pay for something that should not have been taken in the first place, without telling me first because he knew I would argue, and he was right, and he apparently decided the argument was less important than the outcome. I walked to his house that evening with Thomas and Lily and knocked on his door. He opened it. He looked at me. He looked at the children. He looked at me again with the expression of a man who has been expecting a specific conversation and is not certain he is prepared for it. You should have told me, I said. You would have said no, he said. Yes, I said. I would have. We looked at each other. You can pay me back, he said. However you want. Whenever you can. Or not at all. It doesn't change why I did it. I looked at him for a long time. Long enough that Lily, whose patience for adult conversations has a firm limit, tugged my hand and asked if we were going inside. Cole looked at Lily. Something in his face shifted, not softened, exactly, but opened, the way a door opens when someone who has been standing outside finally comes in. Do you want to come in? He said. To Lily specifically. Lily looked at him with the thorough assessment she brought to all new situations. Yes, she said. And walked in. Thomas followed, with the cautious dignity of an 8-year-old who takes his role as the man of the house seriously. I followed them both. What happened after was not fast, and not simple, and not without difficult evenings and silences that lasted longer than was comfortable. I won't give Garnett all of it. They didn't earn it. What I can tell you is what I observed. Cole Warden showed up when he said he would. Not dramatically, no pronouncements or declarations. He came to help with the fence in October because there was fence that needed doing and he had said he would come. He came when Thomas had a question about the south field I didn't know how to answer. He came on a Sunday in November with firewood he stacked without being asked and left without waiting for thanks. He was careful with the children, not in the performative way of a man trying to be liked, but in the way of a man who understands they have lost something irreplaceable and that his job, whatever it turned out to be, was not to replace it. One evening in December, after the children were asleep, he told me about the war. What he had done in it. What it had cost. He told me the way he did everything, without embellishment, without self-pity, with the honesty of a man who has decided you deserve to know what you're dealing with. After he told me, I did not feel I was dealing with anything I hadn't already suspected. What I felt instead was something closer to relief. That someone had said a true thing directly. That I didn't have to guess. A man had read a notice on a public board and spent 3 days in the county records office and written to a lawyer in Cheyenne and filed a legal challenge and paid a debt that was not his to pay, all without being asked, all without expectation. All because something was wrong and he could see it and he knew how to do something about it. The farm was mine. The children were fed. The winter came and we were inside it, all of us, together. That is the story. There is a particular kind of man who does the right thing when no one requires him to and then stands back and lets you decide what to do with it. I decided. I have not regretted it.